The Martian landscape around the monolith had become a surreal battlefield where multiple realities existed simultaneously. Commander Riker found herself coordinating with 3 other versions of herself, while Dr. Voss worked frantically with her alternates to understand the monolith's control systems. The air crackled with dimensional energy as the barriers between worlds continued to deteriorate. Status report. Riker called out to the scarred Dr. Voss, who had established herself as the lead scientist among the dimensional variants. The monolith network is designed to maintain stable connections between exactly 12 parallel realities, the scarred Voss replied, her hands moving expertly over alien control interfaces that had become visible on the monolith's surface as the dimensional barriers weakened. But the activation sequence was corrupted when your mirror versions attempted to weaponize the system. Another Riker, this one bearing the rank insignia of a general, approached with tactical intelligence. The mirror constructs aren't randomly generated, she reported. They're specifically designed to reflect the darkest possible versions of whoever approaches the monolith. It's a psychological warfare system designed to discourage dimensional travel. Dr. Patel from their original team was working with 2 alternate versions of himself to understand the biological implications of dimensional merger. Commander, he called out urgently, we're detecting cellular degradation in all organic matter. If the dimensional barriers collapse completely, the resulting quantum instability will make life impossible in all affected realities. Morrison, meanwhile, was coordinating defensive positions with 4 other versions of himself, creating a perimeter around the monolith while the mirror team prepared for what appeared to be a final, desperate assault. They're not retreating, he reported. If anything, they seem to be drawing power from the dimensional instability. The original Dr. Voss looked up from her instruments with a mixture of excitement and terror. That's because they're not just reflections. They're manifestations of the quantum uncertainty principle applied to consciousness. The more unstable reality becomes, the more real they become. English, Dr. Riker requested firmly. The mirror versions are becoming more powerful as the dimensions merge. If we don't stabilize the system soon, they'll become permanent fixtures in all realities. The scarred Dr. Voss suddenly stepped back from the monolith's control interface, her face pale with understanding. I've found a core problem, she announced. The monolith network isn't malfunctioning. It's working exactly as designed. This is a test. A test. Morrison demanded. By who? By whoever built these devices, came a new voice. They turned to see yet another figure emerging from the monolith. But this one was clearly not human. The being stood roughly 2 meters tall, with features that suggested both advanced intelligence and complete alienness to human experience. The architects, the being continued, its voice somehow comprehensible despite the obvious physical differences. My species. We constructed the monolith network millions of years ago as a safeguard against dimensional contamination and a test of species maturity. Riker stepped forward, her commander instincts taking over despite the surreal nature of the situation. What kind of test? The test of unity, the architect replied. When a species discovers dimensional travel, they invariably attempt to exploit it for power, control, or escape from their limitations. The monolith presents them with the darkest reflections of themselves and forces them to choose between conquest and cooperation. The mirror Riker's voice cut across the battlefield as her team launched their assault. Enough talking. Time to finish this. Energy pulses began striking around the monolith as the mirror team advanced with weapons that seemed to be drawing power directly from the dimensional instability. But instead of scattering, the multiple versions of Riker's team began working together with a coordination that transcended individual self-interest. All Voss variants, the scarred Dr. Voss called out, begin modulating shield harmonics. Morrison variants, establish overlapping fields of fire. Patel variants, prepare to initiate quantum stabilization protocols. The architect moved to the monolith's central control system, its alien hands interfacing directly with mechanisms that were clearly designed for its species. The test has 3 phases, it explained while working. First, discovery of the dimensional gateway. Second, confrontation with your shadow selves. Third, the choice between individual survival and collective stability. What happens if we pass the test? Riker asked while coordinating defensive positions with her alternates. Access to the galactic community and the knowledge of species that have transcended dimensional limitations, the architect replied. What happens if you fail? Permanent isolation and the collapse of all dimensional connections, stranding each reality in permanent solitude. Dr. Voss from their original team made a breakthrough with her instruments. Commander, I'm detecting a way to reverse the process, but it requires simultaneous input from all dimensional variants. Every version of our team would need to work together to realign the quantum matrices. Can we do it while under fire? We have to, the scarred Dr. Voss replied, because the alternative is the destruction of 12 entire realities. The Mirror Morrison's weapon fire was becoming more accurate and more powerful as the dimensional instability increased. One of the alternate Rikers was struck and began to fade, her form becoming translucent as her dimensional anchor weakened. We're losing cohesion, Morrison reported. If we're going to act, it has to be now. Riker made the kind of command decision that defined her leadership style. All teams, all realities, begin quantum realignment procedures. We go together or we don't go at all. The multiple versions of her team began working in perfect synchronization, each group handling different aspects of the incredibly complex procedure required to stabilize 12 parallel dimensions simultaneously. Dr. Voss variants coordinated the scientific calculations, Morrison variants maintained defensive positions, and Patel variants monitored the biological effects on all team members. As they worked, the Mirror Team's assault became more desperate and more dangerous. The Mirror Riker had apparently realized that the dimensional realignment would eliminate her and her team permanently, and she was determined to prevent their success at any cost. Weapons at maximum power, the Mirror Riker commanded. Target the monolith directly. If we can't exist, then nobody does. But as the Mirror Team's weapons focused on the monolith itself, something unexpected happened. The architect's control interface began to glow with energy that seemed to draw power from the very fabric of space-time. The final phase of the test, the architect announced solemnly. Sacrifice for the greater good. Commander Riker understood immediately what was required. All Riker variants, she called out to her alternate selves. We need to position ourselves between the Mirror Team's weapons and the monolith. If that energy hits the control system while it's realigning the dimensions, total dimensional collapse, the scarred Riker finished. The end of everything. Without hesitation, all versions of Commander Riker moved to shield the monolith with their own bodies, knowing that the Mirror Team's weapons would likely kill them all. But as they took their positions, something remarkable happened. The other team members, all versions, all realities, moved to stand with them. Dr. Voss variants, Morrison variants, Dr. Patel variants, all willing to sacrifice themselves to preserve the stability of 12 entire realities. As the Mirror Team's weapons fired at maximum power, the combined will of dozens of individuals from multiple realities created a phenomenon that the architect later described as consciousness-directed quantum stabilization. Their collective intention to preserve life and stability became a literal force that absorbed and redirected the destructive energy. The Mirror Team's weapons flickered and died as their power sources were overwhelmed. The mirror versions themselves began to fade as the dimensional realignment restored proper separation between realities. Test completed successfully, the architect announced with what might have been approval. Species evaluation, mature. Dimensional access, granted. One by one, the alternate versions of Riker's team began to fade back to their own realities, but not before the scarred Dr. Voss approached the original team with a final message. The monolith network will remain active, she said, but now it will function as a bridge rather than a barrier. When your species is ready to join the galactic community, the path will be open. As their alternate selves disappeared back into their proper dimensions, Commander Riker found herself standing with her original team in the familiar landscape around Mars Colony 6. Their rover sat exactly where they had left it, and their communication systems showed full contact with base. Commander, Dr. Voss said quietly, staring at the monolith which had returned to its original black surface. We just passed the most important test in human history, and nobody's going to believe a word of it. Morrison added with characteristic pragmatism. Dr. Patel was checking his medical scanner with wonder. The readings are returning to normal, but I'm detecting residual quantum signatures that prove this really happened. Riker looked around at her team, her original team, and felt a profound sense of gratitude for their survival and for the knowledge that humanity had been judged worthy of something greater than isolation. We file a complete report, she decided. Every detail, every measurement, every observation. Someday, when humanity is ready to take the next step, they'll need to know what we learned here. As they walked back toward their rover, the monolith stood silent behind them, no longer a mysterious threat, but a doorway to possibilities that would reshape human understanding of their place in the universe. But first, Commander Elena Riker thought with satisfaction. They had to get home to Mars Colony 6 and file the most extraordinary incident report in the history of space exploration. The debriefing room at Mars Colony 6 fell silent as Commander Riker finished her detailed account of the dimensional encounter. Around the conference table sat the colony's senior staff, their faces reflecting varying degrees of skepticism, wonder, and concern. The holographic display showed the extensive sensor data that Dr. Voss had managed to collect during their interdimensional experience. "Commander," said Director Harrison, the colony's chief administrator who had been awakened from sleep to attend this emergency briefing, "you're asking me to accept that you and your team were transported to a parallel reality, fought evil versions of yourselves, cooperated with alternate dimensional variants, and passed an alien test that grants humanity access to a galactic community." "That's correct, sir," Riker replied evenly. "And we have the data to support every aspect of our report." Dr. Voss activated the holographic display, showing the quantum measurement readings she had recorded. "Director, the electromagnetic signatures, gravitational anomalies, and dimensional energy patterns are unlike anything in our scientific databases. These readings are consistent with theoretical models of parallel reality interfaces, but they represent the first empirical evidence that such phenomena actually exist." Chief Engineer Torres, a practical man who had spent 15 years maintaining Colony SIXS life support systems, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. "Dr. Voss, with all due respect, couldn't these readings be explained by equipment malfunction or atmospheric anomalies? Mars has been known to produce some pretty unusual electromagnetic effects." "I consider that possibility," Voss replied, pulling up additional data. "But the patterns are too consistent and too complex to be random equipment failure. Moreover, we have corroborating biological data from Dr. Patel's scans that show cellular changes consistent with exposure to altered dimensional fields." Dr. Patel nodded, adding his own evidence. "The quantum-level changes in our cellular structure are subtle but measurable. Our DNA shows temporary modifications that have already begun reverting to normal, but the pattern suggests exposure to alternate reality quantum fields." Morrison spoke up from his position near the door, where he had been monitoring security protocols throughout the briefing. "Director, I know how this sounds. If someone had told me this story a week ago, I would have recommended psychological evaluation. But I was there. I saw alternate versions of myself, fought mirror constructs, and witnessed dimensional technology that's beyond our current understanding." Director Harrison stood and walked to the window overlooking the main colony complex. The familiar sight of atmosphere processors and habitat domes seemed reassuring after the extraordinary claims he had just heard. "Assuming your report is accurate," he said finally, "what are the implications for Colony 6 and for humanity in general?" "Short term," Riker replied. "The monolith appears to be dormant but monitoring. The architect indicated that it will remain accessible when humanity is ready to make contact with the galactic community. Long term, we're potentially looking at the most significant development in human history since the invention of space travel." "And the security implications?" Morrison's expression grew serious. "The technology exists to transport people across dimensional barriers. If there are hostile species with access to this network, they could potentially appear anywhere in our reality without warning. We need to develop detection systems and response protocols." Dr. Voss pulled up a new set of readings on the holographic display. "Actually, the architect's explanation suggests that the monolith network includes built-in safeguards against hostile dimensional intrusion. Species that haven't passed the maturity test are apparently isolated from the greater network." "But we have passed the test," Harrison observed. which means we now have access to this network. Limited access, Riker corrected. The architect indicated that full participation in galactic civilization requires additional development on our part. The monolith test was just the first step. Harrison returned to his seat and activated his personal tablet, making notes as he considered the political and practical implications. Commander, I'm going to need you to prepare a comprehensive report for Earth Command. This situation is obviously beyond Colony SIX's authority to handle independently. Understood, sir. But I recommend extreme caution in how we communicate this information. If Earth Command attempts to weaponize or exploit the monolith technology, it could trigger the security protocols that created the mirror constructs. Noted. Dr. Voss, I want continuous monitoring of the monolith site. Any changes in its status, no matter how minor, are to be reported immediately. Mr. Morrison, I want you to develop security protocols for potential contact scenarios, both friendly and hostile. The meeting was interrupted by an urgent chime from the colony's communication system. Communications Officer Chen's voice crackled through the speakers with barely contained excitement. Director Harrison, you need to see this immediately. We're receiving a transmission on frequencies that don't exist in our electromagnetic spectrum. The signal is originating from the monolith site. Harrison and the senior staff rushed to the communications center, where Chun had isolated the mysterious transmission on the main display. The signal appeared to be a complex mathematical sequence that was somehow being transmitted through dimensional layers rather than normal space. Can you decode it? Harrison asked. Dr. Voss was already working with the signal analysis equipment. It's not using any human language or communication protocol, but the mathematical relationships are recognizable. It appears to be coordinates. Coordinates to what? Unknown. But they're not referring to locations in normal space. These are dimensional coordinates, addresses for specific parallel realities within the monolith network. Morrison studied the display with growing concern. Commander, this could be an invitation, or it could be a trap. Riker examined the mathematical patterns with the eye of someone who had spent 2 decades navigating the challenges of Mars exploration. Dr. Voss, is there any way to determine the source of these coordinates? Are they coming from the architect's species or from someone else? The transmission protocols are consistent with the technology we encountered during our dimensional experience, but I can't determine the specific source without more advanced analysis equipment. Director Harrison made a command decision. We treat this as a potential first contact scenario. All personnel maintain current alert status, but no one approaches the monolith site without my direct authorization. Dr. Voss, I want you to analyze that signal continuously. If you can determine its intent or origin, I need to know immediately. As the senior staff dispersed to their various duties, Riker remained in the communications center, studying the alien transmission with growing fascination and concern. The coordinates were definitely referring to specific dimensional addresses, but without understanding the intent behind them, responding could be either the greatest opportunity or the greatest mistake in human history. Commander, Dr. Voss said quietly, there's something else about these coordinates that I haven't mentioned to the director. What is it? One of them is Earth. Not our Earth, but a parallel version. And according to the quantum signatures, it's a reality where Earth has been in contact with the galactic community for over a century. Riker felt a chill that had nothing to do with Mars's cold atmosphere. You're saying there's a version of humanity that's already part of this galactic civilization? Yes, and based on these coordinates, I think they want to meet us. As night fell over Mars Colony 6, Commander Riker stood once again at the observation deck, looking out at the Martian landscape where a mysterious monolith held the key to humanity's future among the stars. The coordinates transmission continued to pulse with mathematical precision, waiting for a response that could change the course of human civilization forever. But first, they had to decide whether humanity was truly ready for the responsibilities and dangers that came with membership in a galactic community. The monolith had tested their maturity once, but Riker suspected that the real tests were just beginning. In the distance, the monolith stood silent under the alien stars, a doorway to infinite possibilities and infinite dangers, waiting for humanity to choose its destiny among the cosmos. Dr. Sarah Voss stood before the assembled representatives of the United Earth Space Council, her presentation materials displaying the most comprehensive analysis of interdimensional technology ever compiled by human science. The audience, consisting of scientists, military officials, and political leaders from every major spacefaring nation, listened with rapt attention as she detailed the implications of the Mars monolith discovery. The dimensional coordinate system has revealed the existence of at least 47 parallel versions of human civilization, she explained, gesturing to the holographic display that showed the complex mathematical relationships between realities. 12 of these appear to be significantly more advanced than our own timeline, while others show various alternative developmental paths. Admiral Chun, representing the Earth Defense Force, leaned forward with obvious concern. Dr. Voss, what are the security implications of this dimensional network? Could hostile versions of humanity access our reality? The monolith system includes sophisticated safeguards against dimensional contamination, Voss replied. Species or civilizations that demonstrate aggressive or exploitative behavior toward other realities are automatically isolated from the broader network. However, civilizations that pass the maturity protocols, as we have apparently done, gain access to controlled interaction possibilities. Commander Riker, now serving as Special Advisor on Interdimensional Affairs, stood to address a question from the European Space Consortium representative. Commander, have there been any subsequent contacts with the architect species or other alien civilizations? 3 additional contact events have occurred over the past 6 months, Riker replied. Each has been carefully controlled and has resulted in exchanges of scientific and cultural information. The architect species has provided us with basic dimensional physics equations and has indicated that formal invitation to the Galactic consensus will depend on our demonstrated ability to manage dimensional technology responsibly. Dr. Rajesh Patel, now leading a new research division focused on biological implications of dimensional travel, presented his latest findings. We've discovered that limited dimensional exposure actually enhances human cognitive capacity and problem-solving abilities. The alternate reality quantum fields appear to stimulate neuroplasticity in ways that could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness itself. The session was interrupted by an urgent communication from Mars Colony 6. Director Harrison's face appeared on the main display, his expression showing a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Council members, Harrison announced, we've received a formal communication from what identifies itself as the Terra Prime Collective, the advanced version of humanity that Dr. Voss discovered in the dimensional coordinate system. They're requesting permission to send a diplomatic delegation to our reality. The council chamber fell silent as the implications of this announcement settled over the assembled representatives. First contact was no longer a theoretical possibility. It was an immediate reality that required decisions about humanity's role in a cosmos far more complex and populated than they had ever imagined. What are they proposing? Asked Director Yamamoto of the Asian Space Federation. Harrison consulted his notes. A cultural and scientific exchange program designed to help us integrate into what they call the multiversal community. They're offering advanced technology, scientific knowledge, and guidance on managing dimensional capabilities responsibly. And in return, Admiral Chun asked with military directness, commitment to the consensus protocols, essentially a set of ethical guidelines that govern interaction between dimensional variants. Species that violate these protocols face isolation from the network. Commander Riker spoke up from her position at the advisory table. Council members, based on our 6 months of experience with dimensional technology, I believe this represents the most significant opportunity in human history. The Terra Prime Collective has had over a century to develop dimensional science safely and ethically. Their guidance could help us avoid the mistakes that could lead to our isolation or worse. Dr. Voss added her scientific perspective. The mathematical models they've shared with us suggest that participation in the multiversal community could solve many of our current challenges. Energy generation, space travel limitations, even ecological management. But it also requires a level of international cooperation and ethical development that we've never achieved before. The debate that followed lasted for 6 hours, with representatives wrestling with questions that had never before faced human civilization. How do you maintain national sovereignty in a multiversal community? What safeguards exist against cultural contamination or technological dependence? How do you prepare humanity for contact with beings that might be fundamentally different from anything in their experience? Finally, Secretary General Rodriguez of the United Earth Assembly called for a preliminary vote. The question before us is whether to authorize formal diplomatic contact with the Terra Prime Collective. This vote will determine whether humanity takes its first official step into a larger cosmic community. The vote was unanimous. Yes. 3 months later, Commander Riker stood once again before the monolith on Mars. But this time she was accompanied by representatives from every major nation on Earth and a full diplomatic protocol team. The monolith surface had been modified by the architect species to accommodate formal interdimensional contact, displaying intricate control interfaces that were somehow intuitively understandable to human operators. As the dimensional gateway activated, reality shimmered, and a group of figures emerged from the mirror-bright surface. They were recognizably human, but bore the bearing and technology of a civilization that had spent generations among the stars. Their leader, who introduced herself as Admiral Sarah Chinocafor of the Terra Prime Dimensional Fleet, approached with the confidence of someone representing a mature, space-faring civilization. Commander Riker, Dr. Voss, members of the Earth delegation, she said with a smile that bridged the gap between dimensions, "Welcome to the multiversal community. We have much to discuss, much to share, and much to explore together." As formal first contact began between two versions of humanity, separated by dimensional barriers, but united by common origin and shared curiosity, Commander Riker reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with a simple reconnaissance mission to investigate an anomalous structure, but it had evolved into the most significant development in human history. The monolith stood behind them, no longer an alien mystery, but a bridge between worlds, between possibilities, between the humanity that was and the humanity that could be. Through its dimensional gateway flowed knowledge, opportunity, and the promise of a future among the stars that was more wonderful and more challenging than anything they had dared to imagine. But most importantly, it represented proof that humanity had passed its first test of cosmic maturity. They had chosen cooperation over conquest, understanding over exploitation, and unity over division. The universe was vast, complex, and filled with wonders beyond imagining, but humanity was ready to take its place among the stars. The mirror of Mars had shown them who they could become, and they had chosen to become something worthy of the cosmos itself.